Hello, I'm John McNamara, the Information Architect for IBM Messaging, and I'm here today with Chris Matthewson. Now, I know that a lot of people find, we can find that the connectivity between connecting WAS and MQ securely can be fairly complicated, but we're here to show you how to do it quickly and easily. And Chris is a real expert how to do this. He's got a fantastic demo to walk you through the steps. Chris, first of all, though, can I ask you, can you talk about who you are and what you do at IBM?
Yep, sure. I'm Chris Matthewson. I work in the Level 3 service team for MQ, particularly in the field of the Java and JMS clients and SSL specialty in particular.
That's awesome, buddy. Okay, so I know you're going to talk us through and walk us through connecting WAS up to MQ using SSL. So can you break down for us the kind of roughly the steps involved in doing that?
Yeah, sure. So the demo I'm going to go through today, I'm going to start with an existing application. So it's an MDB picking messages up from a queue on a queue manager. And there's a few simple steps you need to follow to actually get that secured with SSL that can be a little bit complicated if you're doing it in WAS, just because there's so many options on the info center pages that you need to know just the few simple steps you need to follow to actually get it up and running without adding all the extras on there. So I'm going to start just showing how the application works without SSL, then saying what you need to have set up on the queue manager side, then going over to the WAS admin console, showing how to set up your certificate stores, all the other things you need to set up with your SSL configuration, and then just showing the application working, picking up messages okay, but secured with SSL.
Buddy, that sounds awesome. Fella, over to you. Can you, if you take the driving seat, walk us through it. Thank you, buddy.
Okay, I will do. Okay, I'm going to go over to a screen share so I can show you exactly what I'm doing. Share my screen. Okay. Okay, so I hope you can see here I've got a WAS admin console and I've got my list of enterprise applications here. So this is the application that I'm going to be using today to test, called MDB test. And you can see that this, if I go into the application itself and go to the message-driven bean listener bindings, this is a message-driven bean. So all this application does is pick messages up from a queue on the queue manager, and that's from the location defined in this activation specification here, AS1 and this queue. So if I just go quickly to those definitions so we can see where it's going to, this is AS1, and it's picking up from our queue manager called V8 test with a client transport local machine port 1418, and my channel is called was.test. Now this little bit underneath here, the use SSL to secure communication with WebSphere MQ, is what we're going to be using later on. But just going to leave that for the moment. So this is all the configuration at the WAS side to say where we want our messages to come from. And here's our queue. We can see it's got an open input count of 1, which means that the listeners there picking up messages, and a current queue depth of 0. So if I put a test message to that queue, that MDB should pick the message up and process it.
Cool.
We put that message. There we go. Nothing on the queue. I go into my system out. If it's refreshed, okay. Nope, it hasn't. Then we should see that that message actually appears. There we go. Message saying hello. So that got picked up, and all that application does is print out to the system out.
Cool. So
I'm going to go through just the steps you need to set up that connection from the application to the queue manager using SSL. I'm not going to go through all of the stuff about setting up certificates and things like that, particularly on the queue manager side. I'm working from the assumption here this is really, if you know what SSL is and you want to use it, you've maybe set up SSL between your queue managers already, or from a standalone client to a queue manager. So you know which certificates you need at which side, how to get those from certificate providers and certificate authorities, things like that. So what I'm really just going to go through is those steps you need to follow through on the WAS side that isn't necessarily particularly intuitive to start with. So there's a couple of things you need to have at each end of the SSL connection. You need somewhere where your certificates are stored, and you need to have your ciphers that are going to be used to encrypt the connection. So if we look at this channel we're using here, was.test, that we had in our activation specification, see at the moment no cipher spec specified there. So if we want to use that to secure a connection, we need to put something in there. The other thing we need to have is our certificates. Now, I've already created the certificate stores for this key manager. They're in this key repository here, and I've specified a certificate label here. So this is the certificate in that key store that's going to be used to secure this connection. This is a version 8 key manager, so you can specify a certificate for each channel, but I'm just using a one which is for the entire key manager. So if we start at the WAS side, we saw on the activation specification there's a little tick box here, use SSL to secure communication with WebSphere and queue. So we want to tick that. Two options there, centrally managed and specific configuration. We want to use a specific configuration, so you can use a different set of certificates, a different cipher for each activation specification or connection factor you want to use. And the one I'm going to choose here is the one I've just created, and I'm going to show you the steps you need to create this yourself. So I've got one called server SSL config. So let's just apply that and save it, and then I'll go through all those steps. Now, these SSL configuration objects are these are the things that contain all of the SSL config information. So your activation specification itself, you don't make any changes to other than say, I want to use this SSL configuration. So that SSL config object is something you create yourself separately from the activation spec. So under resources on the left-hand side of the admin console, you've got this drop-down security, and here you go into SSL certificate and key management. So this brings up a page, lots of different options here. This is where people can start to get a bit confused. There's nothing, you don't want to mess around too much when you start with these configuration settings. You do want to have dynamically update the runtime when changes occur, so you don't have to keep restarting your server. But the place you want to go to create those SSL configurations is up at the top right here, SSL configurations. And when you create a new one, obviously you just click on the new button. I'm going to go into the one I just created, the SSL server SSL config. And so there's a few things in here. You can see I said you need the certificates and the ciphers that we're going to use. So here we've got these drop downs for your trust store and your key store. Now, the way that these work, you need to tell the application server where these stores are to start before you start, and then they'll appear in this drop down and you can select them. So here at my trust store and my key store, I'm using a store called my cert store in each of them. Now, in a Java key store, you have your trust store where you have your signer certificates and your key store where you have your private keys. But in practice, so you define where you put the locations so the application server can find these in this bit at the side here, key stores and certificates. So you can click on new to create a new one here, and see my cert store is the one we're using. I'll go into there just to show you what you put in there. All you put in there, the management scope, the path to where the file is. So here I've got key.jks, it's a JKS type key store. Put the password in there, and you can also look in there just to prove what kind of key store it is. So there's my personal certificates that I'm going to use to secure it, and the signer from the key manager end is in there. So once you've created that certificate store, you can go back in and it'll appear in this drop down here. Say, okay, I want to use my cert store and your trust store and key store, and that's your certificates all set up. The next thing you want to do is to specify your ciphers. Well, this is somewhere where you can get a little bit lost. What you actually need to do is go into this section here, quality of protection settings. Now, there's lots of options in here to do with client authentication protocol. You don't really need to mess around with these too much. This is more about restricting it to specific protocols. If you just leave those as they are, they'll just take all the defaults. What you want to do is go to the bottom here. We've got cipher suite settings. Now you can limit the group that you've got there to very strong ones, weak ones, whichever ones you want to use. I've got a custom one here, and from that list you use add and remove to set the single cipher you want to set. So you can actually specify a group, but when the JMS client connects, it'll just use the first one there. So you can see there I specified SSL RSA with RC4128MD5. Now when you use SSL ciphers with Java connecting to a queue manager, there are some interesting things you've got to be aware of. So you set a cipher suite at the JMS side of things and a cipher spec at the queue manager side, and there are specific pairs you need to match up. So I've got a page open in the Knowledge Center here, which shows all those pairs. So you can see this one with RC4 128MD5. If we look in this list here, you can see we've got our cipher suite. So RC4 128MD5 is here, which means the equivalent we want to set on the queue manager side is RC4MD5 US. So now we know which one we need to set at the queue manager side. We go into our channel properties. We've got wires.test, the same channel we were using here. Into properties, SSL, and then we've got a drop down here for cipher spec. So go through here, just drop down that list. RC4MD5 US, the one we were just looking at in that page. RC4MD5 US. Now there are a few other options in here you can use if you want to. So you can do some filtering on the distinguished names of the certificates. You can specify particular labels, but we're just going to set the cipher to use the absolute basics here. Click on Apply and OK. Now if you've made any changes to your SSL configuration on the queue manager side, you can either restart your queue manager or just do a refresh SSL like this. Okay, now that's everything changed on the queue manager side. Now in the admin console, we've got our activation specification where we've set our SSL config object. So we want to use server SSL config. We saw that we set all of the things in there. We set where our certificates are, the key store. We set the cipher we want to use. So if we go back into our application here, we stop it, and then restart it. Hopefully that's going to start. Yep, that started fine. So we go back into our MQ Explorer here. We've got the queue there. See, we've got our open count still. Put another message. Say hello again. Message is gone. We see our open input count goes up to 2 there because we have the server session that's come in to process the message this time. And if we look at the system out again, hopefully we should see that second message.
Wow.
And that's all we need to do. So that's up and running. That's everything you need to do to actually just set up a really simple configuration for wires to MQ with SSL.
Buddy, that is absolutely fantastic, incredibly useful for people as well. What I'll do is I'll post this on our blogs, and also as well I'll put links into our collateral so you can follow along with your awesome video, as well as the written instructions too. Chris, that is just phenomenal. Thank you so very much for taking us through that. I'm sure it's going to be incredibly useful for people. Buddy, thank you and goodbye.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.